The storm arrived in Blackwater Lake just after midnight, creeping low across the ground until the forest seemed to dissolve into mist. The fog carried with it the smell of stagnant water and something sharper, metallic, like rust. By the time the first thunder cracked, the lake and the abandoned boathouse beside it had vanished from sight, swallowed whole by the thick white shroud. But inside that fog, life stirred. A group of teenagers had gathered at the shoreline earlier that night, daring each other to sneak into the boathouse. It was an old tradition in the town. Prove your courage by stepping inside the place, where fishermen once swore they heard voices rising from beneath the floorboards. Most who tried never lasted more than a few seconds before bolting back out. The group of 5 pushed through the tall grass, their laughter too loud, too forced. Their flashlights shook in nervous hands as they crossed the wooden pier. The boards flexed under their weight, water rising between the cracks. When they reached the door, the fog closed behind them like a curtain, shutting out the world. The boathouse smelled of mildew and rot, its walls warped and sagging with years of neglect. Cobwebs dripped with condensation, broken nets hung from the rafters like shrouds. The air inside was cold, heavy, and carried the faint sound of dripping water, even though no leaks could be seen. Then came the footprints. Pressed into the mud near the far corner, they were too small for any of the teenagers. Bare, delicate, each one filled with rainwater. They led deeper into the shadows, stopping beside the broken remains of a pew someone had dragged in long ago. At first, nothing moved. The place was still, silent except for the creak of the wood. But then, slowly, a shape emerged from the corner. A little girl sat crouched in the dark, her hair hanging in wet strands across her face, her white dress stained with mud. She rocked gently, tapping a stick against the wall in a steady rhythm. The tapping grew louder. The sound echoed unnaturally, vibrating through the boards as if the walls themselves were hollow. The girl lifted her head and, though her face was hidden, her eyes caught the thin beam of light. 2 black mirrors, wide and unblinking. She smiled. The stick fell from her hand, but the knocking continued. Louder now, pounding in time with the storm outside. The floor trembled. Wood splintered. Pale skeletal hands pushed up from the gaps in the planks, clawing for air. Bodies dragged themselves free, their skin hanging loose like soaked paper. Jaws stretched too far to belong to anything human. The teens ran. Their screams were lost in the storm as they pushed back into the fog, their flashlights bobbing wildly before being snuffed out one by one. The knocking followed them, spreading through the mist, chasing them all the way back to the tree line. By morning, only 2 stumbled into town, soaked and shivering, their eyes wide with terror. They spoke of the girl, of the hands, of the laughter that followed them, but their words tangled into panic, too frantic to believe. The sheriff listened anyway. Naomi Holt had lived in Blackwater her entire life. She knew the lake, the woods, the way storms rolled down from the mountains. She dismissed ghost stories the way she dismissed drunk brawls, loud, messy, but ultimately harmless. Yet, when she walked into the boathouse later that day, she found the boards torn open, claw marks etched into the wood, and a single muddy footprint pressed into the corner. Too small to belong to any of the teens. The air was wrong inside, still heavy. A silence that pressed against her chest. When she turned to leave, she swore she heard it, the faint sound of knocking, 3 slow beats from beneath the floor. That night, the fog thickened again. It rolled down from the lake, seeping through the streets, curling between houses, and pressing against windows. Dogs howled until their throats went raw. Lights flickered. And then the knocking began. At first, it came from the walls of houses nearest the lake, gentle at first, like a polite knock at the door, then harder, louder, until windows rattled in their frames and families huddled together, whispering prayers. Those who opened their doors vanished into the mist, their homes left silent by morning. The fog crept farther each night. Townsfolk swore they saw shapes moving in it, figures dragging themselves across the ground, thin arms reaching, jaws hanging open in a scream that never ended. Others claimed to hear laughter, high-pitched and hollow, circling their houses even as the fog swallowed the streets. Sheriff Holt drove the roads alone, her cruiser cutting through the mist, headlights scattering uselessly into the gray. The radio sputtered with static. Her hands tightened on the wheel each time she passed another empty house, its door hanging open, muddy footprints leading inside. One night she parked by the lake, determined to face whatever hid in the fog. The cruiser sat silent, the storm drumming on the roof. The fog pressed close against the windows, thick as wet wool. She gripped her flashlight and waited. The knocking started again, soft at first, a delicate rap against the glass, then harder, louder. The sound multiplied, surrounding the car, on the roof, the doors, the trunk. Her breath fogged the windshield as she tried to steady her shaking hands. Then she saw it. In the rearview mirror, a face. The little girl sat in the back seat, her dress dripping with lake water, her hair plastered to her cheeks. Her mouth stretched into an impossible grin, teeth too sharp, too many. Black water spilled from her eyes, rolling down her face in thick trails. Naomi spun around, but the seat was empty. Only the wet imprint of small footprints trailed across the leather. The knocking grew violent, shaking the cruiser. Windows bulged inward, roof groaning under the weight of unseen hands. The radio shrieked with static, then fell silent. The fog pressed tighter, swallowing the headlights, muffling every sound except the pounding fists and the faint, hollow laughter that seeped into the car like smoke. Some say she drove into the lake that night, swallowed by the water and the mist together. Others whisper that she returned to town, but something had changed. Her eyes too dark, her smile too wide. She went door to door, knocking softly at first, then harder, until people had no choice but to open. And those who did were never seen again. Now, when the fog drifts down from the lake, the people of Blackwater lock their doors and hide away. But it never matters. The knocking always finds them, on windows, on walls, on the roof above their heads. And if the fog thickens enough, they say the little girl herself will appear, sitting quietly in the corner of the room, tapping her stick against the wall, always smiling, always waiting.